Clowney peered through the hole in the wall, Norman Bates style. Clowney was a big guy and that custodial closet may have been cramped. But it was worth it for the view to the ladies' room. Right now the sole third-shift worker, a teenager named Gia, was changing into her work shirt. She faced the mirrors on the far side of the bathroom so her back was to him. Gia was in her late teens but still had very much little girl features. Large round eyes, dimples and curly shoulder-length hair. As she took off her shirt, stripping down to a white tank top, Clowney noted there was nothing little girlish about her body. Gia had an athlete's build. Round shoulders, firm chest, narrow waist, hips jutting and thick legs bulging from a pair of black jeans. But Clowney couldn't help lingering on the girl's arms. They were slightly long for her body, hanging a little lower than they should. And they were unusually muscular. As she raised them to put her curly hair into a bun, their remarkable definition became clear. Her biceps popped like grapefruits and her forearms rippled like she had snakes living under her skin. Her hands were big for the rest of her too. And not delicate either. Man hands. All the manicures in the world couldn't make those mitts look dainty. She may have had an athletic physique, but those arms belonged on a full-blown professional bodybuilder. Gia slid her Buy More Work shirt on and began buttoning. The shirt's sleeves had been cut off, presumably to accommodate those massive pythons. She'd never get written up by management for violating dress code though, which plainly stipulates no employee shall tamper with their work shirt in any way, because Gia was the only employee who worked between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. No management, no security guard. Nope, just Gia. Except for tonight, of course. It was just Gia and Clowney. And Clowney's killer cleavers. Clowney jumped in place a little at the prospect. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, Clowney thought. Gia paused suddenly. Clowney noticed from the mirror's reflection that Gia was staring directly at him. Clowney froze. Had he made too much noise just then? Even so, there was no way she could see his eyeball on the other side of that hole it peered through. The custodial closet was completely dark. Gia resumed buttoning and looked back at her own reflection again. Clowney exhaled in relief. Gia exited the bathroom right on time. It was 10:58 p.m. Clowney was stoked. He could still taste the blood of that family he had brutally murdered earlier tonight. But he still had some juice left in his battery. Enough for one more kill. And Gia would make the perfect nightcap. He heard the loud beep just outside the custodial closet as Gia waved her ID badge in front of the time clock. Heard her sneakers on the linoleum floor as she approached the custodial closet, on her way to the loading dock. Then her footfalls stopped in front of the closet. Oh no. Clowney could see the telltale shadows of Gia's shoes under the door. Barely making a sound, Clowney reached behind and pulled the meat cleavers from the sheaths on his belt. He may have to start tonight's kill a little early. He waited for Gia to open the door, but instead he heard the key in the doorknob as Gia locked it. Shit. Clowney should have seen this coming. Except for cutting off her shirt sleeves, Gia was a Buy More team player. Can't be leaving any doors unlocked, especially after hours. Clowney did know all he needed was a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the doorknob. And he knew just where to find a Phillips head screwdriver. Because when Clowney wasn't Clowney, he was the custodian. Buy More, the department store chain that Gia and Clowney's true identity worked for, had a thriving home delivery service. Seemed like the move to make for the brick-and-mortar establishments that wanted to survive in this day and age. And Gia was the first step in this home delivery service. Out on the loading dock, Gia flipped the light switches. The overhead fluorescence flickered to life, illuminating a cluster of pallets, each one loaded and plastic-wrapped about 8 feet high with cardboard boxes of varying sizes. The pallet cluster was encircled by 10 large rolling bins, each bearing a unique routing number. Gia walked up to a little workstation between two of the dock's sliding doors where she grabbed a retractable blade and put it in her shirt pocket, then plucked a pair of rubber gloves out of a dispenser box. She hated how throwing these cardboard boxes depleted her skin of moisture. Pulling the gloves on with a snap, she walked over to the pallets, took out the blade and sliced the plastic wrap off the first pallet. She grabbed the first box from the top of the pallet and looked at the label, taking note of the routing number printed on it. Then she tossed the box into the rolling bin with the corresponding number. Tomorrow morning, delivery workers would grab these bins and push them out to the parking lot, where they would load the contents into appropriate vans and subsequently deliver to the Buy More customers who made their purchases online. It was all very simple, and it all started with Gia. Gia loved her work. First of all, the hours were great. Since she could remember, she only needed an hour of sleep a night, and she was ready to go for the next 23. Second of all, her job was simple, straightforward, and perfect for her skill set. She liked to throw large, heavy things. Did I say liked? Her body actually craved activities like this. Her arms needed to keep moving, her strength in constant need of testing every minute of every day. She could watch entire movies while doing high pull-ups. She could listen to audiobooks doing vertical push-ups. There didn't seem to be a limit. No fatigue has ever set in during Gia's arm exercises or her work. If the amount of arm day exercising actually showed on her, her arms would be as thick as tree trunks. Instead, they were just noticeably large, but a lot denser than normal muscle. Gia was average height and her body trim, but she weighed almost 160 pounds. A lot of that weight was in the muscles in her arms, which bulged with vascular menace at the moment as she repeated that lift, glance, toss combo over and over. Work wasn't just work, it was a workout. Presently she was doing the work of 3 people and wasn't even perspiring. She looked at the clock. Her first 10-minute break was coming up. She used to work through her breaks, but she kept finding herself with nothing to do at the end of her shift. If she wanted, she would go to the little makeshift gym in the break room and lift weights. Her arms were craving something heavier than the fluff she was getting tonight. As if on cue, she got to the bottom of a pallet and grabbed a deceptively heavy box. It was small, but it had to be about 75 pounds, which was, by the way, the weight limit for package delivery. Unlike normal people, Gia did not have to squat and lift with her knees. No, she was perfectly able to pick up the box with her arms. Her back did not protest, and her athletic legs provided a nice center of gravity anyway. She looked at the label. Next to the route number was the heavy alert. She also saw why the box was so heavy. It was bullets. 75 pounds of bullets. Before throwing the box, she decided to curl it a few times. Then she turned toward the proper bin and stopped. Standing not even 10 feet away was a clown with his arms behind his back. He wore a red wig, big red nose, big old clown shoes, and a polka-dot costume stained with what was either blood or tomato sauce. Maybe both. The clown had a painted-on smile, but he was grinning underneath it. She could see his yellow, crooked teeth. They looked familiar. She cocked her head. Walt. She used the custodian's name. Is that you? It's off-season for trick-or-treating, you know. The clown just stared at her, menacingly. All right, whoever you are, Gia continued. Get the fuck out. I'm trying to work. The clown brought his arms from behind his back, revealing 2 blood-stained meat cleavers. He slowly licked one of them. Gia decided she was no longer interested in having a conversation with this clown who may or may not have been Walt. Instead, she suddenly threw the 75-pound box of bullets directly at the clown. She threw it very, very hard. The box hit Clowney's abdomen before he was aware anything happened. Briefly, he was airborne, flying backwards, and the wind was knocked out of him. He had a quick view of the dock ceiling. Then the floor seemed to hit him, first in the lower back, then the back of the head. Clowney had to process what just occurred as much as he had to struggle to get the box off him. Initially, it was difficult to get back to his feet. Abdominal pain washed over him like a tidal wave. He was also flashing hot and cold and still unable to breathe. Jesus! He mouthed, trying to draw a breath. His head was spinning. Getting back to his feet, he immediately had to bend over, put his hands on his knees, and let a belly full of spaghetti dinner spew from his mouth onto the floor in front of him. Well, technically it was vermicelli, but when the murdered family would eventually be found, the news would call it a spaghetti dinner. This is because spaghetti is more accessible to mom and pop Midwestern breadbasket. Vermicelli bespoke of a certain culinary elitism that folks in America's breadbasket don't cotton to. Staring at the pile of poorly chewed strands of pasta, meatballs, and sausage, Clowney started seeing stars in his periphery. He was going to lose consciousness. Shit, he thought, slapping his own face. He had to come back to reality. He was losing time. Where the fuck was that bitch? Adrenaline kicked in. He had to find her. She called him by his real name. Christ, Clowney, and his killer cleavers had already diced up an entire family. If she called 911 and ID'd him, he was screwed. Shaking off the nausea, the sweats, and the temporary inability to use his lungs, he raised his eyes and spotted her going out the exit door on the far side of the dock. He finally took a nice deep breath and he wanted to run, but something was missing. In all the commotion, he had dropped the killer cleavers. Seeing them on the floor behind him, he went to scoop them up but was struck with the tremendous throbbing pain in his lower ribcage. He probably had a busted rib or two, at least sprained pretty good. Scooping up the cleavers, he hustled toward that exit door, after Gia. The pain in his ribs came in waves. Man, that box really messed him up. He got to the door and looked out at the parking lot, which was full of delivery vans. He saw Gia running toward an overgrown abandoned dumping area behind the parking lot, filled with high weeds and decades worth of other people's garbage that trash men wouldn't take. Beyond that was the filthy Lanesville River. Unless she was planning on swimming to safety in toxic waste, where the hell was she going? When she got to the abandoned dump, she disappeared into pitch darkness, then reappeared when she started using the light on her cell phone. What a dumb bitch. Clowney chuckled but was cut short as the pain from his ribs seared through him. Angered even more now, he bounded after Gia as fast as his long legs could take him. Clowney got to the abandoned lot and had to slow down. A lot of debris on the ground. Even following the path Gia took, his big old clown shoes nearly tripped over an air conditioner, a bed frame, and a partially inflated sex doll. Up ahead, he could see her. She had shut the flashlight off but was plainly visible in the moonlight. She was pacing back and forth in what looked like a little clearing. Waiting for him? That wasn't supposed to happen. She should be quivering in abject terror, and rightfully so. Clowney wasn't exactly going to play hopscotch with her. Clowney entered the clearing, brandishing the cleavers. "Ha!" he yelled. Gia nodded to him, nonplussed. She held up a bicycle chain she probably found in the surrounding detritus. She raised her other arm, doing a bicep pose. She still had her rubber gloves on, making her look like some kind of cartoon character giving a demonstration. She tightly wrapped the bicycle chain around her already generous bicep and twisted it, slightly locking it in place. Then she looked at Clowney and flexed. Her bicep grew alarmingly. The enormous muscle strained the bicycle chain to the point that it broke away, falling to the ground. "You don't want to fuck with me, clown?" she said, glaring at him. "Now go home. It's not my break time yet and I need to get back to work." Clowney made a guttural noise, stuck out his tongue, and shook his head furiously before launching one of the cleavers right at Gia. Unfortunately, the pain in his ribs caused him to screw up the throw at the last second. The cleaver landed on the ground in front of her. Scoffing, she kicked the cleaver into some overgrown brush and began walking toward Clowney. What was she, crazy? Clowney raised the other cleaver and went way back this time, but as he brought it forward, Gia suddenly bolted at him, catching his wrist before he could throw it. Clowney went to hit her with his free hand, but she quickly caught that wrist also. Her long fingers were wrapped around both wrists now, clamping them tight. Ouch! Then she pushed Clowney back a few feet into a refrigerator, then swiftly kneed him in the balls. Clowney shrieked and dropped to his knees. He had gone from apex predator to vulnerable prey in a matter of seconds. Kneeling before her, arms raised, Clowney started to feel a little foolish. To Clowney's shock, Gia began to squeeze his wrists even harder. Clowney's clownishly made-up face contorted in agony as bone, tendon, and cartilage started to give under the vice-like pressure of Gia's powerful hands. Clowney's scream drowned out the snapping and popping of his wrists as they broke under the incredible pressure of her ever-tightening grip. Her hands were like iron clamps. Clowney's cleaver dropped to the ground with a hollow clink. No, this wasn't the way it was supposed to happen. He was a foot taller and weighed twice as much as her. How on earth had she gotten the upper hand? She was a stupid bitch who decided to work third shift in an unsupervised building. She was just asking to get shredded to ribbons by Clowney's killer cleavers. And then, whatever happened after that, which was Clowney's business. At last Gia let his freshly broken wrists go and grabbed him by his ridiculous clown collar. Then she effortlessly lifted him back to his feet, slamming him back against the fridge where the back of his head banged against the top corner. Now blinding pain was coming from his head and his hands, which had turned purple and hung uselessly from his forearms at impossible angles. "I told you to leave me alone and you didn't," she said. "You asked for this." Then, Gia closed her fists. Before Clowney knew it, those fists were pounding his torso hard and fast like steel pistons. Her feet stayed evenly planted as her shoulders fired those powerful arms back and forth. It was a short moment, but for that moment the girl was a human meat tenderizer. Her punches packed so many pounds of pressure per square inch, Clowney's bones began to break. Crunching and popping noises complemented the sounds of gloved knuckles against Clown's suit. She shattered his collar bones first, crippling his arms further. There was no way he was ever fighting back now. She worked her way down his torso, more lightning-fast punches smashing his chest than his gut. The refrigerator rocked violently with every blow. It was all happening so fast. Ribs breaking, vital organs rupturing, blood vessels hemorrhaging. Gia finally gave him a giant uppercut to the belly with such force Clowney could feel his big clown shoes levitate for a second. His red nose even popped off. He stood there for a second, body shrieking from the compounded trauma, like he had gotten hit by a bus. Clowney felt something cascade from his mouth. It ran down his suit and splattered onto the dirt. It was a river of blood and internal tissue. Finally, mercifully, Gia stopped and stepped back as if to survey her handiwork. She wasn't even winded. She grinned a little as Clowney fell helplessly to the ground. He had lost his legs somewhere in there, and those last few punches she'd given him were the only things holding him up. He coughed out a little more of his insides and tried to catch his breath. His breathing was weird now. It was more like wheezing. In his hazy, pain-throttled brain, it occurred to him that a busted rib had punctured his lung. He felt Gia's hand on his shoulder as she rolled him over. He stared up at her now, completely and utterly defeated. It was over. No mas. Gia straddled him. He managed to whisper, "Please, please, God." "I prefer goddess," Gia remarked. Then she plopped herself right down on his shattered sternum. The pain was excruciating. He cried out again. He couldn't help notice how his screams matched the screams of that little family. The family he'd murdered just a couple of hours ago during their spaghetti dinner. Those were better times. Gia reached off to the side for something and came back with his clown nose. "Dropped something," she said, and refastened the clown nose to his regular one. Clowney's eyes had become leaky faucets as the tears poured from him. "Oh, bad news," Gia said, wiping one of the tears and showing him. "Your mascara's running." Clowney gasped in pain-filled horror, wondering when and how this was going to end. "Oh, come on, clown. Stop your sobbing." Gia continued with a big grin. "Smile for me. You've got such a pretty smile." She dipped her finger into the fresh blood he'd coughed up on his suit. She used it as a brush, reinforcing the smile makeup around his mouth. "Come on, clown, smile," she insisted. She bounced a little on his shattered chest, sending shockwaves of pain through him. "Smile, smile, smile," she chanted as she bounced. Clowney cried out again. "Oh, please, no more, please. Help. Somebody help me." "This will not do, clown," Gia said. "I'm going to have to make you smile." Then she stuck a gloved forefinger into each corner of his mouth, pulling out and up. "That's it. Turn that frown upside down." She seemed to get a little frustrated. "Come on. Smile." Clowney's eyes bulged in terror. Gia was not going to stop pulling once his skin didn't give anymore. No, she was going to keep pulling further and further. With a sickening tearing noise, Clowney's lips began to rip up and down the middle of his face. Blood from the tearing skin spurted up at her. "Ew," she cringed, continuing to pull his face in either direction. Gia stretched his torn lips open further, getting the rest of her fingers of both hands in there, and began to pull further still, pulling his face apart, exposing his teeth, tongue, and his jawbone. Clowney's screams got louder as his features continued to tear vertically, down his chin and up his nose. His clown nose popped off again as the skin underneath began to separate. How about that? Each side of the tear had a nostril. There was the cartilage beneath. The two sections of face opened like flaps on a camping tent, revealing Clowney's moist crimson skull meat underneath. Musculature, sinews, veins, tendons, all in motion during his seemingly endless scream. Clowney's eyes looked like two bloodshot marbles darting this way and that. Those two rows of yellowy teeth were presently separated in a never-ending shriek of agony. Gia pulled those two face flaps apart and up, framing his bleeding skull in a big, "Why, there's that smile." Gia chimed over Clowney's screams. She also noted how the underside of his skin was a slightly darker tint than his skull. Okay, shut your face. Whoops, that's my job, isn't it? She closed his impossibly stretched face flaps together again. But they didn't fit together so well anymore. Gia picked up Clowney's nose again, reattaching best she could. But Clowney's face was definitely not the same. His mouth was way off kilter and his fluttering eyelids no longer lined up with his eyes. Bummer. Clowney's scream faded into whimpering and coughing up the blood from his face rip at the moment. He was trying to talk too, probably, but it was kind of tough for him to form words anymore, his lips being in for independent pieces now. Droplets of blood spurted up as he gibbered. "It hurts. God, it hurts." "I hear that. Looks very painful," Gia agreed. "And what a mess. Gross." Gia checked herself. A few drops of blood on her shirt. She had a spare at home, but she was going to have to order a new one. She hated how the bosses made you buy your own work uniform that they made you wear. Working for the man. There has got to be a better way. She got up off Clowney now, stood and grabbed Clowney by his collar. She started dragging him through the field of busted beer bottles, used needles and other little stabby things. Simpering like a child, Clowney felt every little stab too. In spite of all his agony, Clowney's brain was able to process amazement at the fact that he weighed a good 250 pounds. And this girl, this kid really was dragging all his weight with such ease, as if he were just a long jacket. At one point Clowney's ass crack caught on what must have been the jagged remains of a large metal fuse box. Its door stuck up like a shark's fin and Clowney's ass found it. The corner of the metal door tore through the clown's suit and sunk deep into Clowney's rectum, which caught right on it, stopping them momentarily. Clowney's tortured scream rang out as Gia gave an extra hard tug and Clowney's anus ripped wide open on that metal door, leaving a dollop of shit, blood and bits of colon and clown's suit on it. The rushing of the Lanesville River got louder. What the hell was this girl going to do with him? This night started so well. That family. The spaghetti, technically vermicelli, dinner. He did a whole scene at the dinner table with their chopped up bodies. Their blood and guts and meatballs and sausage. It was such a promising start to what could have been a killer career. Seriously, he had so much more murdering to do. How could he get cut down in the prime of his youth like this? Gia finally stopped and let go of his collar. His head plopped on the ground like a bocce ball. They were at a chain-link fence about 5 feet high. Beyond it, a 50-foot drop to the dirty, polluted Lanesville River. Ever since he became aware of the new third-shift employee who worked alone, Clowney had begun concocting fantasies about her. None of them ended like this. Gia stood over him, assessing him for a second, then she moved up, getting her feet under his back. She then bent down and reached out with both hands. One hand grabbed him by the throat, and the other by his groin, which was still aching from her knee. She squeezed tight, raising even more alarm bells of agony. Clowney's whimpering ended for the moment with a light gag. Gia's form was impeccable. She lifted his body up to her chin, by his throat and his balls. His arms and legs dangled as she turned toward the fence, steadied Clowney's body against her chest for a second, then leaned back and lunged upward as she let go, hurtling his body up over the fence, where it plummeted toward the river below. She started pulling the blood-soaked rubber gloves off. "What a fucking clown!" she muttered, shaking her head. As the still screaming Clowney fell, his clown nose popped off and his face flaps blew in the wind, and a severe burning sensation went through his exposed cheeks and eyes. In a moment his face would be cooled by the filthy waters of the Lanesville River. But Clowney would not get to enjoy it because his body would slam onto the shallow river's bottom, where his back and his neck would break instantaneously. When Clowney's dead body resurfaced, it would be carried down to the mighty Mississippi. In a few hours, it would scare the hell out of some poor passengers on a casino boat. So, Clowney would have a legacy beyond the spaghetti dinner. At the loading dock's back door, Gia waved her ID badge across the sensor. A little red light flashed twice, then turned green. Having used her break time in that abandoned lot, Gia went back to work. She finished her shift without further incident. In fact, she had some time left over to clean the vomit off the floor and repair the doorknob on the custodial closet. Sure, they were jobs for the custodian, but Gia had a weird feeling Walt wouldn't be showing up anymore. His weekend gig as a birthday clown may have just become a permanent thing.